Hello everyone, Britt here from Scrappy Boy Stamps, and today we're going to turn the Tombstone Mini Album Die into a shaker. Let's cut our pieces. This die is a bit unique because it has two stitched base layers. These two layers nest together to create a matted look. These work perfectly to add dimension to a flatter card front, but for the moment we're going to set the larger one aside and only use the smaller one. The largest die in this set is the main base layer, and when we combine this with the smaller stitched base layer, it creates the perfect frame for our shaker card. I cut this frame once in cardstock and 3 times in dollar store foam board. We'll also cut the main base layer 1 time by itself to create the background panel. Now let's cut all the detail pieces from the set. This die set comes with a lot of fun extras and you can use it across all of your Halloween projects. There's a spider web, as well as 2 bats, one just slightly smaller than the other, and 1 creepy little spider. There are 2 different cross shapes, one more ornate and one more simple, and each have a layering piece. And the larger of the 2 layers embosses a placement guide, making these easy to put together. Next, we have our 2-piece skull and crossbones. Not only is it an amazing piece to decorate our tombstone, but it's a great crossover for a pirate theme. There are 2 awesome words that accompany this die set. We have our classic R.I.P. or rest in peace, and of course, spooky. Each of these consists of a die that cuts the letters and a die that cuts the outline. Lastly, there are 2 label shapes, one smaller rectangle and one larger curved piece. These shapes have a main layer and an outline layer as well. Now that we've cut all of our pieces, let's create our background. We're going to do a fun inking technique with a stencil, so I'm attaching that largest layer that I cut to my stick and stamp mat by Brutus Monroe. We're going to be creating a graveyard scene, so I want a big spooky moon, and I knew the Goth Girl Scene Builder stamp from Scrappy Boy would be perfect. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get any of the color I'm using for my moon on the rest of my background. So I use the center portion of my blending buddy and cover up the top that the stencil doesn't quite reach. When I use larger inks for blending, I like to have something to stabilize them on my desk, and a little bit of Tim Holtz Media Grip Mat works perfectly. I want my moon to have a bit of a milky, ghostly look to it. So I'll use some Distress Oxide ink in Speckled Egg and fill in the entire shape. And I am purposely leaving the coverage uneven to add some texture. I did want to briefly show that there are shapes on either side of the moon stencil, and these are used to help you create clouds. I decided to leave them out of my design, but they are a very nice feature. Instead, we're going to use my favorite stencil of the year, the Cracks background, and we're going to use this in combination with the moon stencil in order to do a double stencil technique. We'll use Distress Oxide ink in Peacock Feathers, and with my blending tool, I will take that color all the way around the exterior of this shape. By stacking the stencils, I'll only get the Cracks design on my moon shape. And then, of course, my favorite part, the peel and reveal. This technique gets you a lot of extra mileage from all of your texturizing stencils. After I remove the Cracks background, I will realign the moon stencil, and I'll use my Distress Spritz in weathered wood through the stencil to add some more texture. Off camera, I did let the spritz dry completely, and once that's completely dry, I'll go in with some Versamark ink and cover the entire shape. And in case you were worried about cross-contamination of your ink pads, I had absolutely no trouble with these. But as always, do what you think is best. Once my moon was completely covered with VersaFine, I removed it from my stick and stamp mat, and I'll go in with some Distress Embossing Glaze in Cracked Pistachio. Embossing glaze is incredibly good for layering techniques like this one, because unlike regular embossing powder, embossing glaze is just that, a glaze. It's formulated to be nicely pigmented but translucent. Along with the layers that I put down earlier, the glaze will give my moon a sickly green cast and a shine. Before I heat set my glaze, I use this brush, a number 12 by Simply Simmons, to knock off some of the glaze and create that pockmark look that is so indicative of a moon. Once I'm satisfied that I've created the texture I want, I'll use my heat tool and heat set the glaze. Here is a top tip. When I am using a heat tool to melt embossing powder, I like to start by primarily heating it from underneath. I have found that when I heat the embossing powder through the paper from the back, I get less warping and a more even result. Although your heat tool, the kind of embossing ink, and the kind of embossing powder that you're using definitely affect it, I have found that this is pretty universally true. It's also my experience that you will get a better result if you keep the movement of your heat tool at a minimum once your glaze begins to melt. Once all my embossing powder has turned into a shiny green glaze, I'll give it a few seconds to cool down as I manipulate it a bit so that it is as flat as possible. Then I'll take it back to my stick and stamp mat and stick it down so that I can continue with my scene. As a side note, you absolutely do not have to mask off this mat the way that I have. Getting ink on it will not keep it from being functional. I'm just attempting to keep it a little more clean because I'm using it in video. As I'm building up my sky, I know I want my scene to have a green glow. So I know I'm going to concentrate my Distress Oxide Twisted Citron, not only toward the bottom of my scene where the sky will meet the ground, but also overlapping the entire outside edge of my moon. This is one of my favorite colors to create that spooky green glow. Once my first color is laid down, I'll switch to Distress Oxide Pine Needles, and I'll begin to blend that into my Twisted Citron. This blending does not have to be perfect. We can always go back over certain sections. Distress Oxide ink is extremely forgiving and is very easy to blend. You can see I even got a little excited on the left side, but it's absolutely no big deal. With the oxide ink, I'm going to have the ability to fix it. I also decided to use a little bit of pine needles to knock back some of that really intense color that I laid out toward the bottom. I didn't want that portion to be brighter than the glow that's going to end up being around the moon. This is going to be a night sky, so I wanted to jump into one of my blues. Chipped Sapphire, which is my favorite Distress Oxide color, will give us a really nice transition from that glowy moon to a sky where night is obviously falling very rapidly. Truthfully, I could have gone a little darker, but I actually think my Chipped Sapphire might need to be re-inked, so lighter it is. Once I finish that up, I am going to go back to Twisted Citron. And because oxides are a form of pigment ink, the formulation allows you to layer lighter colors over darker colors and get a good outcome. You can see that I'm really able to bring out that bright, glowy quality just by going back over my inking with the Twisted Citron. And with that, my sky is done. So I'm going to reposition my stencil over the moon, but that is only to get my correct placement for the ground. I love that this stencil helps you define the ground area of your scene. It makes this stencil set so versatile because I can completely see this used to create all kinds of different terrain. In my opinion, that feature makes this a definite must-buy, especially if you love to create backgrounds with your builder stencils. With the ground done, we're going to switch to the other stencil in the Goth Girl Scene Builder set. I'm using Hero Arts Intensified Black dye ink to add these creepy tree silhouettes on both sides of my scene. Now you might wonder if this is going to actually work over the top of our embossed moon, and I'm happy to report for these purposes it absolutely does. But one thing you should probably remember is that I was planning to put a protective layer over this in the form of our shaker window. If you're going to use these same steps for a regular non-shaker card, I would probably recommend an ink like StazOn that is guaranteed to work on a non-porous surface. After our tree silhouettes are done, I did want to add a little bit more texture to our sky. And since Distress Oxides are water reactive, it only took a little bit of water sprayed from my Distress sprayer. It reactivated my oxide ink and created some amazing little ghosty orbs in the background. At this point, I just want to quickly audition my shaker window. This lets me make sure enough of my scene is still visible. At this point, I did add a little bit more Distress Spritz, just to add a little bit more crunchy texture, and I let that dry off camera. Once that was dry, I pulled out the absolutely adorable new Spooky Eyes background stencil. You guys, this stencil is so cute. I know some of the other design team members have used this to make really cute things this month. I'll make sure that I tag some of them at the end of the video. Now, I only want the eyes to be up in the top, darker part of my scene. So I'll just use some low-tack tape to mask off the parts that I don't want my ink to go through. And I'll use some Hero Arts Unicorn White to stencil on my eyes. Now, what I'm doing here is a fun little trick if you wanted to use any kind of paste or other mediums over a dark background. You're going to apply one layer of good quality white pigment ink to the areas you're planning on working with. Once you have your white ink applied, you'll temporarily remove the stencil and heat set the white ink. Pigment ink tends to be a slow drying medium, so heat setting it is a good idea if you plan on putting other things over the top. It prevents the ink from smearing or from mixing together and contaminating your other products. Once the ink is set, we'll reposition the stencil back exactly where we had it, and then we'll apply our final layer. This gorgeous product is called Glitter Glaze, and it's from Brutus Monroe in the shade Sunshine. What's amazing about this product is that it isn't really a glitter glue. It's more like the glitter is suspended in a gel medium. So when you apply a thin layer of it onto your cardstock, the glitter is distributed evenly over the surface of your project. The gel disappears as it dries, leaving you with a permanent application of glitter, but no extra dimension. With the background finished and set aside to fully dry, we're going to assemble our shaker window. I've used the larger of my 2 stitched base layers to cut the acetate, and I'll be using the double pane shaker method to make sure I get a lot of good movement with my shaker bits. First, I will attach the front pane of acetate to my dollar store foam board. Then I'll layer my cardstock shaker frame on top of that acetate to hide the foam board. I did want to remind you this is 3 layers of foam board. I just stacked them up using liquid glue off camera to make the video go a little bit faster. I also did let each of these layers dry a little bit off camera because when you're using liquid glue with a non-porous surface like acetate, It does take a little bit longer to get a permanent hold and have the glue fully dry. I was super excited to get to pull out some of the new shaker confetti plates, Halloween icons, and Halloween monsters. I love that the little tombstones in the Halloween icons are the same shape as our shaker window. Off camera, I cut a shaker mix full of zombie hands, spider webs, and of course, little tombstones. Once I had cut all of the icons I wanted from the shaker plates, I added in some sequins from my stash to finish it out. I believe that all of these sequins can be found at Michael's, and I used silver glitter sequins, green metallic sequins, 2 different types of iridescent, one in black and one in light green. I especially love that green one. It's sort of translucent and it really matches back to the colors we used to create our moon. And I'll finish up with an iridescent dark blue. It's a good idea to add in regular sequins or beads along with the elements that you cut with your confetti shaker plates. Things like sequins and beads are a little bit heavier because they're made of plastic, and adding a little bit more of that weight to your shaker mix helps everything move around smoothly. Once I had the mix just the way I wanted it, I added it to the inside of my front shaker pane. And before I close up my shaker window for good, I do take the time to turn over any of my little shaker confetti that's not facing forward. Then I'll run my anti-static powder tool around the perimeter of the shaker window, just to make sure there's no extra static or sticky places that are going to gum up the works. And then I will use my liquid glue and attach the back acetate to close and finish my double pane shaker window. I admit that I used to have a lot of trouble getting my shaker bits to stay where they could move around freely. And if that's you, I highly recommend this double pane method. Now I'll set that aside to dry and bring back in our background panel. You can see here the amazing finish that glitter glaze leaves on the eyes in my spooky sky. The other thing I love about the double shaker window is that it gives you the ability to build up your scene inside of the window, and because you don't have to worry about the elements getting in the way of your shaker, you can use things like chipboard and layered die cuts in your scene without being worried that it's going to impede the movement of your confetti. As you can see here, I'm able to use these layered die cut crosses and then add a few bats inside of my scene, and I'm totally not worried about it interfering with my shaker at all. One of my other favorite things to do with all of the icons that you can cut from the confetti shaker plates is build your scenes with much smaller details. Before I added my big shaker panel, I wanted to put a graveyard into the background of my scene. Using the Halloween icons shaker confetti plate, and I cut several of the little mini tombstones, which you are able to get out of the plate in 2 different sizes. Once I inked these up with a little black ink, I added these to my background, and they make the perfect little graveyard. And of course, it was too tempting. I had to cut the little zombie hands from the Halloween monsters shaker plate. I added some dimension with a little bit of black ink, and those went right into our graveyard as well. I mean, if you're going to add a graveyard to a Halloween card, you have to add the hands of the undead coming up out of their graves on Halloween night, right? Of course you do. Finally, it's time to start bringing all of these elements together. First, we'll use some liquid glue and add our shaker pane to the background. You know, as I watch this back, it was a little rough for me to keep this project in frame for some reason, but hopefully you're still mostly picking up what I'm trying to put down. If you took a good look at the thumbnail for this video, you probably know by now that this card is going to feature one of our new collections, Haunted Halloween, based on one of the most popular and historic theme park rides out there, as well as a couple of fun family movies that try to explain the backgrounds for all of these characters. Off camera, I fully colored all of the images from the stamp set, which features stone statues, a ghost bride, one of our favorite fortune tellers with her head stuck inside her crystal ball, and of course, 3 iconic ghosts trying to hitch a ride. For this card, I wanted to focus on my favorite piece of art from this stamp set. This spooky specter with his tall top hat is an infamous part of the amusement park ride that this set was inspired by. Don't take my word for it, but there might be something a little creepy inside that hat box that he carries around. I also wanted to include one of these little stone gargoyles, which I know don't always act strictly like stone. Truthfully, I just had a really fun time adding in some of the elements of the die set as well as some of my stamped and colored images. All the little spiders and bats and little elements that come along with this tombstone die really add a ton of value, and I can see getting a lot of mileage out of this set and this set alone. The Haunted Halloween collection also features a 6x6 double-sided cardstock pack. As you can see, I was so inspired by it, I even painted my nails to match. And while my card design on the front didn't really leave a whole lot of room for me to use the paper, I wanted to feature some of it on the inside. It is super easy to make a mat for the inside of your card using one of the base layers. I really love the spooky eye detail on the front of my card, and so I thought, why not more spooky eyes on the inside? I finished that off with a little panel where you could write a personal message, and our card is done. Now, you know, I usually make a second example, and you might have seen this one already posted this month. I decided to make this larger-than-life center step card. Not only did I want to show off all the additional patterns and images from the collection, I also couldn't help but use our new alphabet die set that you must add to your stash. And just like the mansion where all of these ghostly characters live, there are more fun and frightening things on the inside. I love the sentiment, the midnight hour is close at hand, and the small frame from the Evil Queen mini album was the perfect fit. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for joining me today and sticking it out to the end. We love you so much in our little crafty community, and we could definitely not do this without you. Speaking of community, you should come and join ours over on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. That is the best way to get announcements, shipping updates, new releases, and inspiration from our amazing design team. If you are interested in any of the stamps, stencils, die sets, or pattern cardstock in this video or any of the others on our channel, go ahead and visit scrappyboy.com to see the entire product line. New releases are happening every month, and you don't want to miss out on your chance to grab yours before they're gone. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and make sure you're following the Scrappy Boy Stamps YouTube channel so you don't miss any uploads. And if nothing else, remember this. If you're ever in a big spooky mansion and you hear the words, "Welcome, foolish mortal," it's probably time to run. I'll see you next time. Bye.